first thing that I want to do is actually to introduce you to the Robert Turner Collective, because we are most definitely two people in the collective. We don't actually have an independent artistic existence, so it's important that I acknowledge that at the start, that we are two people. And here you see us, the two of us, are doing some important research on the perception of how one receives color when projecting on black, using, as you see, some very high precision quality optical instruments. So on the right, just to introduce him, you have Louis-Adrien Robert, and I am here on the left. And it's not such an enormous creative leap to see how we got to the Robert Turner Collective from the two of us. If you haven't had the opportunity to go by the exhibition Shapes here at EPFL, we have an exhibit there, so I hope that at some point later on you'll have the chance to see that. So I really divide my time between the art world and mathematics. And one of the things I want to say at the outset is that I actually find these two activities rather different. And it's not just that the communities are different, or perhaps that view the world or interpret the world in different ways. It's really the activity that I engage in seems to me to be somewhat different in these two areas. And it turns out that it's a little bit difficult to put your finger on why this is. But actually, the thinking about archetypes has pressed this point a little bit. And in some ways, this has clarified some things for me. So it turns out that it's a very good topic for talking about mathematics and art. So the first thing I really want to do is to distinguish between two possible meanings that we have for archetype. And it's kind of important for the rest of what I want to say. And the two usages of the word archetype, or of the notion of archetype, are, if you want, archetypal example and universal archetype. And to explain what I mean, we take perhaps an example. So if I say Darth Vader is a classic sci-fi villain, by doing so, what I'm saying is that this character, Darth Vader, is an archetypal example whose has the essence of some type or category of things. So Darth Vader in this is the archetypal example of something, and the universal archetype, well, what is he? He's some kind of intergalactic villain. So I also have the category or class of things which is villains. So I have on the one hand an example of something which captures the essence of something more universal. Now, not all examples of villains are archetypal examples. They have to encapsulate, illustrate what I consider to be the essence of the thing which is supposed to be being described. And another example of this would be if I take as my universal archetype something like the form of a rectangle. Then a square is a rather bad example because it's too specific. It captures some elements of the essence of rectangle, but actually it's too specific. So if I were to visually represent an archetypal rectangle, probably it wouldn't be a square. And I think that this distinction is useful when we try to talk about common features that one sees, like reoccurring motifs. So one might see spheres in mathematics, one might see spheres in art, one might see the same things, but one has to dig a little deeper to understand the role that these reoccurring motifs play, I think, to understand the possible differences between their usage in the two contexts. So it's true that both in math and art, one sees both sorts of archetypal examples and more universal categories or classes. But I guess the main point I want to make in this introductory talk of mine is that I think that one thing that distinguishes the two activities is there's a slightly different emphasis in each case. So if we start with the math context, if I say something like the square root of 2 is an irrational number, what I'm asserting there is that the square root of 2 is an archetypal example of a class of things, something more general. The universal there would be irrational numbers. And they're like the irrational numbers themselves are like characters in a story, perhaps. And the point is that when one actually does mathematics, what are you dealing with? And you deal rather directly with the universal archetype. You can, of course, deal with specific irrational numbers, but you tend to make theorems, you tend to make theories, and you can say very meaningful things about irrational numbers without actually having to stare them in the eye, without having to come across them in your morning breakfast cereal. You don't have to come across actual irrational numbers. So you are dealing more with the universal archetype. If we then move to a more sort of artistic area, if we take the example of the sphere, for example, then this can be viewed as Etienne was, as a kind of universal archetype. But then what's important is how you place the sphere, or how you interpret the sphere. And its meaning is added or given by how you represent or how you place a particular instance. So again, for example, if I take a sphere about this big, and I make 2 installations. One of them, I maybe paint the floor a bit light brown, and I perhaps paint the wall a bit blue, and I put up high, I put this sphere like this. And I call this installation a family day out at Cocoa Beach, 1969. Within that, you have some cultural baggage. Cocoa Beach is where you could view the Apollo launches, so you probably import your cultural baggage into the meaning of this, and you say, well, okay, so this sphere which I've placed up high, this probably, well, maybe it's the sun, maybe it's the moon, but it's something like that, and I give it meaning in that way. If, on the other hand, I take the same sphere and I make another installation, and I put the sphere in a basket on the floor, and I call my installation a family day out at Place de la Révolution 1789, then the existence of this sphere takes on a completely different, even horrific meaning. So it's the same sphere, but it's how I place it, what I do with it, which gives it meaning. And I should add to this, because this is not something I'd planned to say, but I think also Etienne raised this, and it's very important, that the aspect of materiality, the materials you use, become very, very important. That's part of the instance of the object that you might be making. So, yes, so in some sense, in summary, what I want to say in setting out my stall, if you want, at the beginning here, is that if I were pushed to give a difference, I would say that one difference between math and art with respect to archetypes is that mathematics deals somewhat more directly with the universal archetype, whereas art deals more with the instances of particular archetypes, and the difference comes in the context, in the representation that one makes. And perhaps just to finish up, let me illustrate this again, the same phenomenon by sort of a joke in a way, which 7-year-olds like, which is, so on the left you have this game where you have to find this character, Wally or Waldo, I think. And so there you look among all these characters on the beach and you say, well, find Wally, and there's Wally. So the 7-year-old joke, if you take this picture on the right, is, well, find, in this more mathematical example, find X. The joke, of course, is, well, there's X. I found X. It's just to the right of that vertical line. And the reason this joke works, actually, is precisely because of a confusion of the two types of archetypes. So on the reason we're referring to X here is that X, even though we're looking for a particular instance of number to solve this mathematical problem, we need a notation actually to refer to the archetype, which is just numbers. So that's kind of why that joke works. And also, if you actually go back to my previous slide, just to make the same point, you see, when I talked about the example of Darth Vader being a villain, I could represent Darth Vader visually. There's a picture of Darth Vader. But when it came to representing the archetype, well, I just had to actually use some notation to do so. So it's a little bit the same thing. Okay, I think I probably used up my time, so I'll stop there for now.